Okay, so I don't speak very much of any of this. There's a lot of it that I probably have never told anyone. So bear with me, it's a little difficult. My walk with the Lord has not been very long. Not true conviction and living with Him in my life and wanting Him to live through me as well. My mother, she was, I guess you would say, a chronic alcoholic. When I arrived here on this earth, I too was addicted to alcohol. There was not very many good memories with my mother, but I have a few that I do hold on to. She passed away when I was 6. And so she never told anybody who my father was. So essentially, I grew up parentless. And I always looked at other children at school, and I watched them with their parents, and I watched that love that they received. You know, the unconditional love. And that was something that I always wanted so badly. You know, it was pretty deep. And, by the 2nd grade, I realized that I was different from the other children. And I ended up being the kid in the corner, basically. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to have to explain why I never had anybody show up to school functions, to all the parties and whatnot. But I was given an opportunity to grow up with family. I had my aunt and I had my grandmother. And they did their very best. But I still had the emptiness. And I basically spent my whole childhood searching for something to fill that spot. I guess by the 4th grade, I pretty much was completely rebellious. I was a straight F student. I skipped class, skipped school, didn't care. And that, I guess by 13, I had already started drinking. I was sneaking out, partying, was boy crazy. And I guess in my mind, I thought that maybe one day a man would fill that void for love. And that's why I always, one day I'm going to get married and, somebody's going to love me. And I'm going to know what it feels like to be loved. And growing up, I knew there was a God, but I didn't know Jesus. I would pray, and I guess if I had a prayer request, as I would call it as a child, was to know love. That real love, unconditional, to fill that spot. I ended up dropping out of school when I was 16. I'd missed so much due to an accident, and by the time I could walk again, I went to work. Instead of going and getting my GED, I just went to work. At barely 17, I ended up pregnant by a much older man. And I gave birth to my first baby girl when I was 18. Probably wasn't many months later, I ended up pregnant again with my second child. He asked me to marry him for 4 years, and I said no. And finally, after 4 years, I said yes, because I thought it was the right thing to do for the children. But, there was still that empty void. There was still no love. And I was still searching. And there was still nothing there. 2 years later, it ended in divorce. And it wasn't good. I'm not going to really go into detail of that because children. But, in the divorce and the child custody, he was awarded my children. I had visitation rights if it was agreed upon with him. So after that, I really began to self-destruct, pretty much. The alcohol, the partying, I'm trying to fill more of a void. And, I dated a few guys here and there, nothing ever, still I'm empty. And finally I met this guy, and I thought, wow, I thought he was amazing. He said all the right things. I ended up moving in. And it wasn't very long until after I'd lost all my anything to be independent is when he became abusive. At first it was, I called it petty stuff. And I ended up losing a child that I pretty much mourned alone. And it was all pretty much the same until very last. And there was one night that everything kind of changed. It was brutal. He had a look in his eyes. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There was nothing there, but yet there was something there. And he beat me for a very long time. And at first I kind of thought, okay, I hope he, hurries up when we get finished. And then it was, okay, maybe he'll get tired. And then sometime later, my thought pattern kind of changed. And I said to myself, this is it. I had eventually became practically unable to even lift my own head or to turn my head over so that I could get a breath of air. And I began to, my thought pattern went to, well, I hope it's over real quick. Just go ahead and kill me. That's what I was hoping for. And eventually I asked him to go ahead and let it be over with. I essentially begged him. And that's when it got worse. So then he began to torture me. And as I lay there almost lifeless, my joints were pulled out of socket. I had choked on my own teeth, was choking on my own blood. And I just knew at that moment that I wasn't gonna, that was it. I was never gonna get out. And some life came to me. And I heard something. And it told me to get up. And I'm kind of a woman of a plan. When I do something, I've already planned it out from point A to point B. But I didn't have a plan. All I knew was something was telling me to get up. When I didn't even have the strength to lift my own head up, I stood up. And I still didn't know what my next plan was. And this was in a camper. So, there's one way in and there's one way out. And I looked at the door. He's standing in between me and the door. Something says, go for the door. And I went. And then he pulled his knife on me. And he came at me several times. And these words didn't come from me. But I pointed my finger at him and I told him that he didn't have the right to take 3 little girls' mother away from him. And his eyes changed. The life came back to his eyes. And he dropped the knife. And it ended. But I was still here. I stayed. He said he was going to start living for the Lord. And things were going to be better. And it only lasted about 2 weeks before he reverted back to his old ways. While I didn't have a great relationship with Jesus, I started to pray. Because I basically had nothing. I'd had everything taken from me. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't have family anymore. All of my relationships have been stripped away, including any friends that I had left. I didn't have a phone call. I had a prayer. I prayed, get me out. Get me away. And then one day, I got an offer. Well, I never told anybody what was really going on. He'd been arrested before for some smaller things, smaller events. So people knew, I had an offer. It was a job offer. It was a roof over my head. It was a cell phone. It was everything that I needed. It was a place to bring my girls to. I took it and I ran. But then, I still continued to live in my destructive ways. For quite some time. The person that gave me the offering out, years later, well, not years later, weeks later, months later, we fell in love. We got married. I gained a son. Still living in destructive ways. Wallowing in sin, basically. I mentioned something about maybe going to church one day, and nothing much was thought about it. And I guess a few months later, I woke up and Chad told me that he'd been reborn. He gave his life to Christ. I thought, wow. I didn't even know that he didn't. I'd never asked him. I wasn't really living for the Lord. By this point, I knew who he was. A seed had been planted, but it hasn't done anything. As he started to live for the Lord, his fire, it was raging. I did the same. I don't know if you would call it recommitted or if I was born again, because to me before I wasn't living for him. I was wallowing in sin. I was creating all the havoc in my life. I welcomed all of it by the way that I was living. After I became born again, things started changing. My mind started changing. My heart changed. I looked at everything so much more different. That spot in my heart, the one that I had spent my whole life searching to fill, that hole was gone. It was filled. And the best thing, I know that I am loved. I'm unconditionally loved. More than any person on this earth could have possibly given me. It's bigger. And looking back, I would look at Christians and I would think, wow, that's boring. Or they're crazy. But I get it. And until you really feel it, and you look at them, and then you really get it, and then you become transformed. My mind doesn't even work the same. While I'm still unworthy, he still saves me every single day. And he still loves me every single day. He has delivered me from so much. What the doctors would call sleep paralysis. I think it's much more than that. I was delivered from that. I suffered from that for years, and it's gone. PTSD. The doctor said I would never get over everything. It's gone. The anxiety, the depression, the fear, the unworthiness, it's gone. Because I know that Jesus, he is the way, the truth, and the life. And that's two things. The devil is a liar. And I have listened to his lies my whole life, but not no more. I can rebuke them every day, every hour, every minute. And I can live in the love of Jesus. He desires for everyone, for every man to be saved. No man shall perish.